under the cyber attack, which disrupted the normal operation of many departments and clinics throughout the world. So it's very useful and timely talk. Let's welcome Dr. Schott.
Thank you, Dan. So it's kind of hard to talk about a subject that's changing so fast and rapidly, but we're going to kind of dive into it a little bit, and then probably in the next year or so, you're going to see a lot more presentations and publications on the same subject. I have no conflicts of interest. There we go. So the objectives for this talk is to identify changes in clinical workflows during an organization-wide cybersecurity event, to critique potential solutions for continual care and minimal loss of data, use the unique abilities that already exist in the department and to optimize those to respond to the event quickly, and to discuss the importance of mitigation and recovery to ensure safety of your patients and continual care. So what is a cyber event? I kind of wanted to explain this a little bit because a cyber event is an incredibly general term. It can be anything small, like just phishing emails that, I mean, all of us get all the time and ignore, to ransomware, which many hospitals have recently had to deal with, to denial of service attacks. But the main thing here is they're either trying to take data and then sell it on the black market, or to destroy data. And both of those are very adverse effects that we want to avoid at all costs. So every hospital has emergency plans. We've had emergency plans for flood, fire, hurricane, tornadoes. I'm from the South, so that's why I put hurricanes in, and then I realized none of you guys have had to deal with it yet. And this picture is from when the Missouri River flooded. So these type of events are very limited. The maximum amount of damage is during the event. And so your emergency plans might include having remote backups, having ways to move important equipment from one area to another. While for a cyber event, the maximum amount of damage can actually be post-event. So if your network is taken down, it might be years later that the thieves are still using your data to make a profit. And this results in a loss of trust from patients, and that's incredibly hard to rebuild once it's gone. So in the past year, I didn't really want to call out any particular vendor, just because they're actually all doing incredibly good jobs. They're all trying incredibly hard to fix all the holes and issues, and it's really going to take everyone, both the hospitals and the vendors, working together. So some examples was a large vendor had an outage of their cloud service. So that wasn't just crippling one hospital, that was crippling hospitals in multiple states, small hospitals, big hospitals, and it's incredibly difficult to recover because the individual hospital did not have control of the situation. They were reliant on the vendor. We also saw in the news the gas line outage, which was also ransomware, and that crippled multiple states, which is terrifying, I think. Every few weeks, there are different healthcare systems making national news. If you just Google, you can find all kinds of different areas. It doesn't matter how big or small the hospital is. Pretty much all over, they're having to deal with this. So some of you may know that last year we had a cyber event, and so that's kind of what inspired this talk. We're still working on this and still continuing to discuss improvements to our system, but we do need to have the conversation about it and make the most of it. So here's just a general overview of our workflow. So we have there's a lot of processes in radiation oncology that require the access of a lot of data. So during treatment referral, we need to have previous diagnosis and past results. So that means connecting to a PACS system and probably connecting to some type of system like Epic. And then there's the SIM where we're scanning the patient. So we're not just taking the image, we're also documenting how the patient is set up. There's treatment planning, so contouring, image fusion, and then plan optimization, which is very computationally heavy. Then there's treatment QA, so transferring the plan from the treatment system all the way to the LINAC. And then the data analysis of the treatment plan as it's being delivered. Then there's also the record and verify system during patient treatment. And then there's post-treatment follow-up, so that would be diagnostic imaging from radiology, any other tests involved. So this is a lot of IT-heavy information. And so we need to kind of work together. And that's kind of the main theme of what can we do. We have to support IT. Hospital IT systems are incredibly large, and so they have great experts on servers and software and how to get information from one area to another. But the hospital is just so complex, so we really have to be very efficient of how we communicate with them. And it's really on the individual department to be sure that their unique needs are met. And also during the cyber event last year, we really learned that backup communication channels need to be available, whether that is knowing which fax numbers people will actually pay attention to or respond to, or having a replacement, some type of replacement for email. So that might be using cell phones, which are not on the Wi-Fi network. And one idea that's come up is having isolated backups. So not just backups of the patient, but having backups of all your settings on all your equipment. And then the main thing is to keep IT updated. In any IT department, they're going to assign a priority to pretty much everything. And in some type of major event like this, that priority is going to be very, very important. So annually, you need to audit that priority list. And just make sure, just thinking about it, like you have different vendors for your planning system, maybe you have something special for contouring, maybe you have another like third program for something else. And if it's going to be on the clinical side, it needs to be assigned a fairly high priority. An issue that comes up in research and clinical is when a tool goes from research to being approved for the clinical side, that would increase the priority, and you need to be sure they know that beforehand. They're not going to change the priority in the middle of an event just because they've had to do so much planning to get there. So during an event, what does this look like? It's really weird. So when an event is declared, it's going to be declared by IT. They're going to take in all the information and analyze if it's site-wide or not. And then IT, once they shut everything down, they are going to be bombarded by a lot of calls from a lot of different departments. And so the help desk, their job is going to be to document who's having issues and how those issues are affecting them, but they're not necessarily going to be able to tell you when the network's going to be back or how soon. A lot of that information is going to be considered very sensitive. You have to realize a cyber event could include like an active hacking attempt. And so if you go and say, you know, we're recovering, and you say what your plan is to recover, you actually could accidentally leak it to someone involved in hacking your own institution, and that would be incredibly frustrating and upsetting to everyone. And of course, in any event like this, you got to assume the worst, but really hope for the best. And we're all in this together. Kind of everyone did a great job last year and kind of just band together. We all knew everyone was just as frustrated as each other. So there's really no reason to get snippety or complain, and we just had to get through it. So in the middle of treatment, one concern would be is what if this happened during the middle of treatment? Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with this, but you have to realize it's kind of the same issue of if the power went out in the middle of treatment. There are backup systems, and the individual treatment is loaded onto the LINAC before treatment is started. And so you're actually able to finish the treatment within a certain amount of time, depending on the system. But then the issue becomes, once they're treated, is the record and verify going to be updated correctly? So you would have to actually take some notes and physically document this patient was treated at this time. Thankfully, we didn't have to deal with it. There are some examples. There were over 500, and I think the estimate now is 560 institutions all had to deal with ransomware last year. And so some of them had to deal with it in the middle of the day. Sometimes they found it in the middle of the night. So it's a possibility that you need to prepare for. So the front of the department. So when I say that, that's kind of like the patient side. So that would be physicians talking to patients and therapists talking to patients. So one idea was to have a hard copy of patient schedules. I know hard copies are very frowned upon, but you don't know when you'll ever be able to get into Epic or ever be able to get into any other patient digital copies. So even just having only the current patients is incredibly helpful. And then you also need to work with physicians to identify priority cases. One idea that has been discussed on and off at different points is have an agreement with your surrounding institutions. So in worst case scenario, they might need to help you replan your cases and treat them at another site. But this requires a lot of pre-plan. You can't take your entire schedule and dump it on some other hospital. That's physically impossible. So that's when you do need to have the physicians kind of have a discussion about priority and which are the most sensitive cases. From physics and IT, the therapists and the physicians are really going to be looking for updates on when patients can be scheduled. So an important idea is having dry runs for cyber events. You're never going to be able to have a very perfect time estimate, but you at least can give them kind of roughly an estimate of whether it's going to be days or weeks or months. Thankfully, we did not have to go to months. It was only a few days, but you never know. In the backend department, so this is like the Linux, the afterloaders, CTs, PETs, MRI, all of those run off of computers. All of them have to be on some type of network. So what happens during a cyber event is the treatments are taken offline. This is done to just make sure that their software is maintained and safe. The vendors do need to be notified. However, what came up this time around, I had never actually known this before, was your vendors need to have an NDA. And if you don't have one before the event happens, that's actually going to waste a lot of time setting that up and getting that done, when instead you could have had them come straight over and help you. So communication during a cyber event. Depending on the type of event, your email could be down, voice over IP phones could be down, and then all file sharing drivers will pretty much disappear. So one important thing is just to have a simple agreement, like everyone on staff that has to come in physically should probably meet once in the morning and then once in the afternoon in case you have multiple shifts. And that's where you can kind of discuss and debrief what worked, what needs to be dealt with, when the next updates might be coming from managers. And then communication with other departments. That's a hard one. Who do you contact during a normal day versus who do you contact during emergency might be different. You need a contact person for standard information. So radiology has to deal with a lot of different departments. They're going to get a lot of phone calls. And so in our case, day one, we were able to get a manager on the phone who was able to supply us with CDs, but that was incredibly time consuming. It's incredibly difficult if you're going to plan on getting the CDs for 10 patients. It's going to take an incredibly long time to get into your system and to upload those for future planning. So you really need to discuss and kind of coordinate. You also have to realize it's not just radiation oncology requesting this information. Other areas of the hospital are going to want information for their patients too. So you need to kind of figure out how to coordinate all of that beforehand. So coming back online, so once the vendors in IT establish like a local network, and they can establish that the backups are good and valid and safe to use, all of therapists in physics kind of end up working together. So we ended up running every IMRT QA before any patients were started. And that was pretty impressive to see everyone just kind of put down everything and just go for it. So it was physicists, therapists, residents all working together and just going through and making sure the treatment machines were delivering exactly how they were delivering before the cyber event. So lessons learned. This is just kind of a summary of some of the ideas so far. We're still having meetings and coming up with ideas, so this will definitely change over time. And so far, Astro and AAPM have both announced possible papers and other talks coming out in the future, so there will be even more ideas coming out. So one lesson is to have a local database with copies of patients under treatment. This is only on the network, very limited amount of time. And this is because if you have a full backup running at all times, it's actually going to back up the malware too, and that's an incredibly difficult problem. So you need to coordinate with IT. They need to know that it's physically secure and digitally secure. Next was have a backup clinical physics directory. You know who to call, you know which patients are being treated, you know what kind of things need to be done. You have all of your QA worksheets, you have all your calibration files for equipment. So you can pretty much hit the ground running once everything's turned on. Like I said, have a local copy of QA forms and a local copy of all patients on treatment and scheduled at the nurse's station or some with secure location. And one thing that was brought up in a lot of these conversations is keep equipment up to date and coordinate with vendors. There's a lot of legacy equipment in many different physics departments and radiation oncology departments, and that is a big headache for IT. That's why a lot of times they've announced, like, if it's not Windows 10, they will take it off the network because it's well documented. There's a lot of security holes in previous versions, and it's very well known. It's no secret at all. So you really need to work closely with IT. A lot of vendors will even give you tools to help move over data to newer systems. So yeah, a lot of this is just about communication and kind of coordinating with each other, even making sure like physics is talking to the therapists are talking to the physicians, and everyone's kind of getting together and getting on the same page. And then here's some resources. I picked these out just because I thought they would be useful for anyone interested in this subject. So the first one kind of walks you through the solution of using a backup. The second one is a little more scary, but it has a lot of information about the FBI announcement and so other places you can look for information. And then the last one was a good discussion about the depth of the issue. And that's it. We'll see what Astro and AAPM come up with in the next year.
Thank you very much, Diane. That's a very interesting talk and quite a lot of nuggets for practical and useful information. So next we have Dr. Sam Hindley,